What a lovely bit of work, Sigbjørn. It, I like the fact that that you take the time to sort of make everything work in a really direct way. It's all very tasteful. It's well proportioned. Everything functions. Your massive tutti isn't necessarily grandiose, but it's just really effective. A lot of your subtle textures and your softer episodes and so on in here are they're scored to like the best effect of the instrument, and I think that there are a few experiments here and there, and I'll talk about the relative effectiveness of some of those. But right now, let's just jump back one bar, which actually would be one whole page, to the beginning of E, and look at how this was scored. We've got the allargando, and we have the non-decrescendo, at least in some parts. But other parts, I've noticed that you really backed off on the lower notes so that they wouldn't overwhelm the sound picture here at E. So according to your own scheme here, that's perfectly fine. I really like the way that the strings are marked here to diminuendo to piano and then to carry on. One little problem, though, is in the original piano score. I think you might have missed something, or perhaps you decided to leave it out. And that is that the B, the held B in the piano, keeps on going for another full bar as the low solo from below, the left-hand solo, catches up with it. So I think that would really have helped your arrangement here if you had continued on just with those same held Bs. Maybe continue on at piano or diminuendo to pianissimo and then fade out at the end. I think that it would have really worked great. So no big issues going into the end of D. All right, and this all seems good. This is interesting that you back off like an eighth note duration earlier than everybody else. I'm not so sure that makes a whole lot of difference. But notice here just a single stroke on the timpani and not marked as a dotted whole note, as some similar parts have been. And we'll talk a little bit about the half fermata here. All right. So starting from the beginning of the solo here in double basses, I would say soli, right? Because they really need to know that they are being spotlighted here. And then you just pick up from the end of their little solo to cellos, and I think I would also say soli here. This is something that I probably should have mentioned in other evaluations. I'm realizing now that there were a lot of times when this, and it doesn't actually have to be soli, but it would be really nice if the players kind of knew that they were really going to be front and center. Yeah, so like if you hold the Bs, then the cellos are coming up to meet them, right? And ending up on the same B. And then we all start together, right? Now, there's one little problem with the way that you have everything scored here, Sigbjørn, and that is the this is a melody, right? And this is an accompaniment. So by making everything the same volume, you are giving too much weight to the upper parts. You could easily just have had this upper part here just piano with no crescendo or diminuendo, maybe just a little bit of fade out at the end, and then really given the surge here to your clarinet. And then the same thing here. I would not go diminuendo here because this is part of the ongoing melody. If you're saying, oh, well, piano, crescendo, diminuendo, and then it just really does not feel like it is still the melody, the way that this is scored. It's almost as if you're turning the melody into a bass line that is less important than the bassoons that are on top of it. So I would say really just pay attention to the functions, the exact functions of each part, right? So, and just really try to maintain them if you can, at least with the approach that you have here, which is a really kind of a loving kind of attention to the composer's intentions, right? That is what I really feel from you. Now, the piano part has tenuto marks in the melody, and those tenuto marks are serving the purpose of having kind of a blocky sound, almost bell-like in the piano playing. Dun 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 dun, little accent, right? But that, like, tenuto means something different for winds and strings and brass, right? So, do you really want that just real kind of unfinessed sound, or maybe put a slur across the tenuto marks and turn them into portato. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So just watch out about importing exactly what the articulation is for the piano. That should be like my next. That should be part of my checklist. I don't know if I put too many things on the checklist. It's sort of, it's like, I think it might limit people too much in finding out new things. And once again, we have to watch out. Here, this is beautiful. You've marked down your bassoons, but why not the oboes, right? Why not the upper clarinets? Now, I just want to check something really quick. So you do have 3 clarinets. Okay, I just want to take a quick look at this. Yeah, 3 clarinets in A, bassoons. Yep. Okay, all right. Just refreshing my memory really quickly there. Right. Yeah, so that all would work good. So yeah, just keep in these upper parts, just keep it softer, right? I think that it's difficult to score an internal melody or a lower melody in a such situation like this. The ear will jump to the top, right? So you have to make choices in your scoring that ensure that the melody is quite strong and it doesn't have to be really strong, but it has to be like much firmer than the accompaniment that's floating above, right? So I would keep these parts down as well and keep these parts down. Just let the melody be piano, let the accompaniment be pianissimo, at least at the beginning. And then here you have bassoon and third horn. Da 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 da, and then bassoons and cellos. Da da dum, bum bum. And here I felt that the way that this was scored, like quasi forte, it didn't really quite sound that way in the mock-up, but I felt it was one of the subtler and yet more comprehensive scoring of that implied leap. Da da da, da 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 dum, da 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 dum. But really, like, the ear of the listener of both the piano work and most of the orchestral versions is really hearing da da dum bum bum, which I really feel is what Barvinsky intended here. He's changing this into more of a definite melodic part. And it all fits together beautifully. And you've scored this really nicely. Bassoons giving way to horns supporting the clarinets and so on, the English horn. Just really, really nice scoring in here. Now, there's a good chance that that this English horn part is going to get a little sucked dry by the first horn right here. Yeah. See, like I don't think you need to put one like telling us that this is the first horn in parentheses. I think I think we know. Continuing forward, yeah, you've got a rest here, but it's still it'll be the same part unless there are many bars of rest in between, several bars of rest in between. I think I would want to know. But this is fine. You know, obviously you're continuing on, right? And yeah, I would not have any problem realizing that this was still the first horn. All right. All right, so reduced strings right in here. That's a lovely idea. Um, just watch out for the balance with the winds. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a great idea. So there's a place where you transition from winds to strings at the beginning, and I'll have more to say about that. But for now, I really like the way that this works and the way you're fading into the winds here. That's a really lovely idea. And then it works its way down. This is all great scoring right in here. Love the function of the English horn right in here, helping bridge the gap between solo oboe and accompanying bassoons. Just a perfect, beautiful way to use the English horn in this situation. All right, and tutti with mutes. All right, soft but in a singing style. Yeah. So this is a little strange. Da 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 da, and you have the strings fade behind them, and then subito mezzo piano. Right. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that that's what you intend here. It just is a little strange the way that it looks on the score. Yeah, and nice, like you have a little cushion here of winds behind the strings. Yeah, see, just exactly the right way to score that. Da 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 da, and then overlapping on your way down, and the cellos like lead to the chord with really soft clarinets in the back. So yeah, just really, once again, I mean, it is straightforward scoring, but that doesn't mean that it's simple. Like the choices that are being made here are extremely elegant, and they are, to the perception of this orchestration exactly what the music needs, right? So it's like no more and no less. It's really, it's beautifully controlled. It's beautifully laid out, and is not really, wasting anybody's time or anything. Really, really cool. So now let's jump back to the D section and take a look at that before we go to the beginning of the piece. Here we can see a rather delicious start to this section. It's one of those things where, it almost makes me wonder whether or not, part C and D should have been one section, and then, really like after this, things start to ramp up and get more excitable. But it just worked out better in terms of offering opportunities to our orchestration community on Patreon. All right, so let's start off, just basically taking this apart by function, which I think really, really helps the perception of the work. Now, here we have got a role for harp, which really is taking over those cascading octaves. Okay? Well, there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that you are tending to mark your harp at exactly the same dynamic level as most of your other parts. Now, I mean, obviously not all parts, because you have some pianissimo scoring here in your strings. But the harp really has to be louder than just piano. And then we have the added problem that as these parts starts to crescendo to forte, right? it'll just be harder and harder for the harp to compete with it. And there's a further aspect, which I'll mention in a second. But, just looking at it here, I would say mezzo forte, right, is what you would need. And I think if you were to take this approach, it wouldn't hurt to add celesta in there or some other instrument that has, or xylophone, not xylophone, glockenspiel, or some other instrument that has the ability to support the harp in a kind of a, that have a really similar sound. Now, right here, okay, let's get back to this section here. I think I remember putting this in the Pitfalls video. I have to go and watch it again because I feel like I'm quoting things from it that may or may not be there. But in the piano part, in order for the left hand to play this and then leap up and play octaves, Barvinsky drops the octaves by an octave. I'm saying the word octave too much. But instead of having like the high F sharp cascading downwards, he takes things an octave lower. Just so that that these little features right in here are not so hard to reach. But that is a pianistic decision. Why does it have to be your decision? See, just as things are getting stronger and stronger, you're dropping the harp down into a register with its cascading octaves where it is more and more difficult to hear it. If you had kept the octaves high, and there's absolutely no reason to change them except for if you are a pianist, right? So just really think about, like, when you see functions in a piano score and you're orchestrating it, are those functions something that you want to import into the orchestral score? And if you do, like, can you build on that decision to say something unique and different and supply something that has nothing to do with the context of having to put the hand in a certain place in order to play everything smoothly? Do you see what I mean? So, like, I see, at least for your approach here, where everything is pretty much staying in its lane, I'd see no reason for you to drop these octaves, just because Barvinsky did it so that his left hand could reach over. I mean, especially not with this continuous line here of artificial harmonics. So this is interesting. So you've got an artificial harmonic 2 octaves higher than the touch 4, and here you are throwing in an F sharp as if it were a natural harmonic. So I think with this you also need to do the same thing. Just score this exact same thing an octave lower, right? Because that's what if they are going to have to do this anyways an octave lower, then you should write this out an octave lower and not just throw in this F sharp. So like either take both approaches or neither. But I think that this is the better approach. It avoids too many ledger lines and putting in ottava lines, which the most violinists that I've talked to kind of hate. So just score this touch 4 artificial harmonic from this F sharp down here at the bottom of the staff, right? And then you have your octave harmonics going all the way through and supporting what's going on here in the harp. But to tell you the honest truth, by the time you get to here with this building sound here, the harp is going to become ever more difficult to hear and more inconsequential, right? So if there is some way to bring in bass instruments here with a more active role in playing, like gradually helping out with the lower octaves of the cascade, and if you can keep your harp up and then even get higher as things get bigger, then I think that you have got more of a chance for your approach here to work. Bringing in the horns, what do horns do to harps in their middle register? They just suck out all of their resonance. And it's delicate enough already. You've got an entire 7 bars here, right? And we kind of don't see until the next page that you're headed to fortissimo, right? So, I mean, crescendo, poco a poco, and then I think you really like say where you were at right here. If you're saying mezzo piano in some parts and so on, I think you should start at mezzo forte, get to forte by here, and then be at fortissimo on the next page. I mean, not that just marking up the harp will balance it necessarily. All right, so the rest of it really is the melody and those little added notes. So, are they separate or anticipatory? You chose to mark them as separate elements. And I think that they work pretty good. Yeah. It's interesting that you've got some elements piano and some elements pianissimo. And, it's you may not need to do that. Perhaps everybody could be pianissimo or everybody could be piano, right? If everybody is pianissimo, then the harp only needs to be up to mezzo piano. But I would say if you have this mixture, I would definitely still head for bigger dynamics for the harp. Is this a rolled chord? We should put a roll on it. All right. All right, so now the treatment of the melody and the harmony. So we have this nice big stack here. Now, did you notice that it's really hard to hear the flute the way that it is scored, or in your mock-up? Now that is just pretty much of an illusion. You kind of notice when you really go for the high notes that the flute starts to come out. But yeah, there will be a little bit of that. There will be a little bit of the oboes kind of slightly canceling out the flute above with the way that you have this big stack. But it won't be fatal, all right? I think that things will still come through pretty nicely. Yeah. Yeah, so, I don't see any huge problems here. Yeah. And, yeah, and then you sort of... and then you change the contrabassoon. Yeah. I almost feel like you could have changed to these rolls here even earlier, but that's all right. It's the way that it's scored is fine. Yeah, and yeah, this is great. You're bringing in the horns, and this was my favorite part right in here was the kind of frantic tremolo pushing towards the big revel chords. So let's take a look at them now. Yeah, so here's another problem with your leaping octaves as they were interpreted from the page before. So remember how I said it would be nice if gradually some bass instruments came in and started helping out. So that there would be more power on the lower octaves when we got to here, right? Well, look, suddenly you're going you just have this much bigger octave roll here, and I feel that the transition between the two sections is a little abrupt, right? It's just suddenly this is happening, and as this builds and gets stronger and stronger, this is going to need more and more support. You can hear in the mock-up that it's starting to disappear. What's the contrabassoon doing? Nothing. All right. Probably in some limited ways, the bass trombone, maybe somebody else could be helping out with some of these pitches. But yeah, I mean, it's lovely. You got this nice thick string scoring here, and horns, poco forte. That's cool. And then you're adding on more and more wind color and more heavy brass as you go. So yeah, you can write con tutta forza all you like here with a harp, and it's just not going to matter. The way that you can have your harp take a stronger role here is to have higher chords, take everything up an octave. Like this right in here is just not going to come through. Those notes are being, well, I mean, they're not necessarily being played by anybody else. I thought that I had seen them covered or doubled. So yeah, so this is not going to come through very strongly. There's just too much. There's too many other things happening. I would say take everything up an octave. Don't worry so much about these parts. leave them to other stronger instruments. All right. But, all that aside, I think that this is a really beautiful, smooth transition and push forward to what's going on here. Now, you don't have too much heavy brass here interfering, and the wind scoring is pretty straightforward without getting too over the top yet. So it's okay that you are taking like a more harmonic approach with the strings rather than just having them play just straight octaves, which I sort of recommended in other parts that had fuller scoring from the beginning. See, like here you're starting off with like a stack of harmonic scoring for the strings and the horns, right? And then if you just take the logic of that and take it forward as you are adding the winds the way that you are, then it makes more sense the way that you got it. But you could even possibly be, so like you kind of have some octaves and so on in this. And I really love the growing heavy brass right in here. All right, so now we get to the juicy part. Let's just look at the functions, all right? Because it can get, like some of the cross relationships can get to be very complex between the parts. One thing that I will say, like most of this rest of the screen is scored kind of the same way, but like as we go forward, you start to bring in little changes, few little differences of approach. So I think that actually makes things better, right? It keeps the score from just sounding like you're pounding away at the same exact context, the same exact positions of chords all the way through. All right. So here you used a D trumpet to just really get those high notes really nicely, especially going up. So I keep jumping back and forth, going all the way up to this high written B. I think that is a really great approach to take. You may find that the player will play it on their E flat. Sometimes there's like adjustable E flat D trumpets, so like it's just like a matter of a slide, and then you could just play what is written in the score, especially if the fingering is going to be a little trickier. But like if you go back and look at my orchestrating Barvinsky video, if you check it out, like enharmonically, spelling out what is played on an E flat trumpet, it's actually not too complicated with the harmony. So whereas here you have just tons and tons of sharps, even though you're using a D trumpet. So E flat trumpet may be the way to go. But anyways, whichever one you use, it's essentially the same instrument. Just there's not a huge difference between the brightness of a D and a E flat or whatever. It's essentially the same instrument. So watch, and like trumpet geeks will immediately jump at that and hit the button. No, it's not. You don't know what you're talking about. That's fine. All right, so back to interpreting the melody. We talked about our trumpets here playing the octaves, and we got that same octave here in seconds and firsts, the lower pitch of the firsts. We've got that same pitch going on here in your English horn, and also stacking up here like the flutes and the piccolo, helping to fill that top octave there. So it's a very bright, it's a very bright kind of sound, right? Just the way that you have got it all stacked. Like it is all about trumpets, the flute family, and strings with a little bit of help from the English horn. Yeah, so that will have a definite kind of a piercing sound, just a very like almost like sort of flashlight in the eyes kind of a sound. All right, and here you took pains to really illustrate what this meant, right? And I mean, maybe that's a little bit of overkill. Maybe just like, I would say, just like do the first beam group, and then you can go to this on all the other parts. You don't have to do a whole bar of it. Just do like, one beam group and then continue on in the abbreviated context. All right, so so that is all set, right? And now let's look at the way that the other parts are scored. I really kind of love like the way that there's some weight on some lower harmonic parts here, horns and trombones. I think that all works really, really well. And kind of slamming away here with bassoons and clarinets. Chunk, 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 chunk. Yeah, see, so you know what I mean? I think if you have ACL period. I think that if you don't have any other kind of clarinet, it's okay just to have clarinet, CL period, rather than a clarinet, right? Because, alto clarinet, right? It's kind of what I think of a lot, and just like from thinking of band scores and things like that. But here, like D trumpet and C trumpet, that's absolutely necessary because, because you really do need to know the difference between the two. You can't just say trumpet and trumpet, right? But I think you could just say clarinet, and if you had a bass clarinet, BCL period, right, for bass clarinet. All right, back to what we were looking at here. All right, so I just talked about the repeated notes here. I think that this is really, really great. Horns working together with this sort of furious yaga daga 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 kind of middle strings. So about the only danger here is that you have so much weight in your heavy brass and your upper horns. They're not really upper horns. Your first and second horn. You have so much weight in like these long extended notes, right? And you have not really all that much happening in like the kind of arcing phrases. I love the way you left out the rest here. Okay, that's great. Exactly right. So, I'm gonna just wonder if there could be just somebody who played some other parts, but the way that you've scored it, you really don't have any extra people after you've used everything up, right? So, yeah. So it's just really a trade-off. Do you want this more kind of harmonic, lower harmonic roll, or do you want kind of the arcing stuff happening here? Now, yeah. Yeah, probably, like, considering how all of this is accented, you probably just putting an accent on one note doesn't really mean a whole lot. I mean, you might say like martellato here, like so just everything is just hammering away. That might help. And it's interesting how you have some elements that are fortissimo, right, and some that are forte. So forte in the brass, that works pretty good. I really feel that all the winds and all the strings should be fortissimo. You might even, like I wouldn't mark it in the score, but the horns might actually be asked, your second and fourth horn might actually be asked to play fortissimo here, just to really bring it up a little bit. And then, of course, we have the foghorn parts from below. I'm not so sure how effective this was to go brrrr. Maybe if it was forte piano from the beginning, brrrr, do you know what I mean? That might work a little bit better. Just to give it some emphasis, because I'm not so sure that getting softer here in the middle of the bar is really doing anything, right? When you have the implied crescendo, like here, I don't know why you don't have it in the horns. You could start further back with everybody, I think. So if you just hit this hard to give it some weight and then crescendo, hit it hard, forte piano, crescendo from there rather than diminuendo to the middle and then push again. Yeah. But yeah, I like the tam-tam here. I'm not so sure that you have to go 16th notes on this. I think that just an unmeasured tremolo will work fine. Because, the player is going to be holding probably like a bass drum beater or something else, some big kind of muffly bundle up mallet. So like them playing a bunch of 16th notes is probably not a whole lot different from them just playing an unmeasured tremolo. So I would just leave it unmeasured tremolo. All right. Yeah, and sort of a big bash. This this fortissimo thing is going to be a lot more powerful than you may think it is. If you are using your mock-up as a guide, it will really dominate everything that is happening here, right? And I think it is good that you don't have an LV tie, an unfinished tie. I think it really should only last a whole bar, right? Yeah, and then a big crash on cymbal. Now this could have an LV tie on it, unfinished tie. All right, so here we get up to like that beautiful high note there on D trumpet, sounding C sharp. Same C sharp as the flute here and the lower divisi first violins. Yeah, it's just going to be a beautiful monster of a score. Yeah, so it's a little confusing that you don't really finish off here, right? Like you just roll forward with a big sound and you don't end with like an A sharp or some other compatible tone, right? Like you could end on a C double sharp written as D, right? Yeah. So everything is like, so right here you don't have to write this because you've already done it, right? You've already shown us, you've illustrated what this is. You don't have to, we're starting a new screen here, a new page as it were, but you absolutely do not need to spell it out for us. You can just continue to use it's using sempre simile. You don't even need to use that. We know what it is. We know the abbreviation. You should just, yeah. I mean, yeah, and like I sort of take back what I said earlier. I can see the logic of having like having an emphasis on the second beat here, but maybe put it in more parts, right? Like maybe you could put it, just give it a little bit of bite. Yeah. Yeah, and then this is cool. Bringing in trombone here and like changing around the functions of some of these parts. Starting to, you leave the piccolo out. We're taking away the trumpets. Like the trombone is coming in here. The A trumpets are coming in here to to merge with the D sharp and then walking down and everything else. Yeah. Yep. And then here you have your half fermata, and I think I think it's very, very clear. I really prefer this to the short fermata, the kind of rice, kind of like the rice gatherer's hat, the cone with the half triangle or with a little dot underneath it. I really think the half fermata is clearer to more players. Dun 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 dun. Yeah. Yeah, and then as I mentioned before, this all works really, really great. So yeah, so really, really nice D section. Okay. Now let's jump back and look at the very, very beginning, A through to section C. Back here at A, you have just really, we're seeing the foundation of your straightforward approach. Using really effective scoring that isn't overly complex or overly nuanced or anything else. So I'm totally not saying at all that people who are exploring really delicate, intriguing combinations of instruments are overly nuanced. But I'm just saying that in this case, this approach that's being taken is just has this wonderful, elegant simplicity to it that is still, quite artistic and has its own kind of depth. So let's check it out. I mean, there's a couple of issues. I will get to them. All right. The main thing that concerns me. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll talk about what's slightly bothering me about this page. Not bothering me, but like making me think about things to tell you. And that is, it goes back to my first evaluation criteria, like right at the beginning of my list. Does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? I would say it does, but it could a little more, right? I mean, I love this, like, just little push right in here. And I really love that you transition to strings here. All right. But I feel that the strings are scored here to be kind of extra weak, and that when their individual timbre emerges, it is such a drop off that it really draws attention to itself. It's almost like somebody slamming a door when these instruments go away. And I have a few solutions and a few things for you to think about with that, but you might just disagree and say, well, that's the way I wanted. That's what I heard. But I just sort of felt that emotionally, like we had this beautiful growth right in here, and then we just completely fell off the cliff when you transitioned to the strings. It just was not a smooth transition, and I felt, looking at sort of listening to the mock-up and looking at the page and listening to it in my own mind, I sensed that you actually did want a smooth transition to the strings. So we'll talk about how to do that as we get there. All right, so I just had to get that off of my chest. All right, flutes 1 and 2, flute 3, doubling piccolo. All you have to do is go D, B, L, period, P-I-C-C, period. So double pick, right? And then here, same thing, D, B, L, period, C, B, and capital C, capital B. All right? So that just saves a lot of time, a lot of space in saying what your third players are doing. All right, so we start off here. I feel that this is a beautiful layout here. I like the fact that the lowest pitch in this stack here is a D and not a B. Okay, so you maintain the integrity of Barvinsky's proto-impressionist harmony, right? And that leaves a proto-impressionist feeling. And, it makes me wonder how aware was Barvinsky of impressionism, as the actual term and as it was being applied, with some resistance by the composers to the music of Debussy and Ravel and Faya and other composers who just kind of were part of a sound and part of a genre and who were friends and everything else. To a certain extent, early works by Villa-Lobos, especially like his Quartetto Simbolico for flute, alto, saxophone, harp, and celesta with women's voices. That is so impressionistic, right? So Impressionism was a quality. So, you could say, well, it grew out of experiments in Russian music and the later works of Liszt, and there are even some moments where you kind of see things emerging out of places where you would never even imagine. Like really a few phrases out of Wagner and a few phrases from from Brahms and so on. So yeah, so it was a flavor that started to be distilled, right? So it's not it's not completely impossible for Barvinsky to sort of stumble into this kind of feeling and this sort of flavor on his own. But I mean, I think my instinct is that it was not accidental. That it really shows that at that time Ukraine was not a desert, right? It wasn't a complete backwater where nobody had any idea what was going on in the greater world. There was a lot of cross-cultural fermentation between France and Russia at that time. Debussy used to be the house pianist for the patroness of Tchaikovsky at the time that Tchaikovsky was being helped out by her, Nadezhda von Meck. So Debussy got a chance to meet Tchaikovsky, and Tchaikovsky didn't really impress him as being a very happy person. Seemed like he was very morose, I think Debussy mentioned. So there was a lot of back and forth. So people would have known about each other's scores. Perhaps Sweet Bergamosk had made its way to I think, was it Kiev, where Barvinsky was living at the time. So anyway, back to the harmony. Like here I just mentioned the harmony, and I go on this big blathering exploration. So this is really beautifully set together. You've got the octave melody happening between first oboe and first clarinet, and you've got the second clarinet and English horn sharing the harmony, and that's what's really beautiful about that is you're putting the double reeds on the outside and the clarinets on the inside, the enclosure, and I feel that is such a great sound, especially with English horn below rather than like second oboe below, because the one of the cool things about the English horn is that it's a lot like bass clarinet in some ways. It has a timbre that, in combination with other instruments in harmonies like this and so on, can complement them without completely imitating them. It still has a voice of its own, but it has a way of merging together sounds, and I think that is part of its double reed character, sort of double reed mid-range character, something that bassoon can also do within the. It can just merge beautifully from, say, the bottom of the bass staff up to the middle of the tenor register. It just has this beautiful quality of being able to just merge seamlessly into violas and other combinations, horns and so on. All right, and then you keep the relationship going, keep the proportions going. This all works beautifully. And then here, da 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 da, you're kind of doing something similar as the horn part below. The extending, like hanging on to, suspending the harmony as it's built on top of, like with the third flute just sort of hanging on to the pitch on the inside. And this is really a third flute kind of a job, right? So it's perfect that you're giving it that, and rather than the second oboe. I think that it's more discreet that way. Yes, it is a voice crossing and so on and so forth. No, you do not need to bring up the volume of the third flute. It's in a nice warm register. It's going to be fine. Yeah, and then this little push right in here, poco, right? Yeah, I think that it all works fine. You might be able to even just leave off the crescendo and diminuendo here in the horn. Might be perfectly sufficient just without it. Da 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 da. Yeah. See, here's where like we've started off softly. We've had this same relationship continue between all of our constituents, and then you keep going with it, right? I think at this point, seeing as how you're going to be merging with the strings later on, perhaps this phrase could have had some difference in the way that it was scored in the winds. Not huge, but enough to change around the relationships a little bit, in a way that the gradual insinuation of the string color could lead to a more natural handoff of roles from one to the other. And by doing that, right, that checks the box of, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? Because keeping everybody in the same role for too long we stop telling a story and we just end up sitting on a mood, right? It's like Barvinsky is definitely telling a story here in this prologue, right? It's not, and that's why, like when you only have one instrument like a piano, just color shading and nuance and phrasing and nuancing the tempo as well, and just all of those things in a master pianist's hands, right? Like Violina Petrochenko, wow, we lucked out with her permission to use her tracks. That is all in one instrument. But when we go to the assembly of instruments, I feel that it's harder to hold on to that for too long, and then without us like losing our sense of narration, right? So, so the risk is that not only will we stop hearing a story and get stuck more in a mood, we'll also feel like we're kind of static, right? So I'm not saying that you are static here, but I'm saying that there is a risk of it becoming more static in the mind of the listener. And there's also the problem of pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano throughout, just like the Faya excerpt that we had last year. Could this be a place where things would start to open out a little bit, anticipating more of a role here with cello and so on? And, could things get just a little bit deeper here? Something to change the context, to change the roles, to change the positions of the instruments a little bit, so that the context shifts, right? That it moves forward. We have a progression of the timbre. And then here, like you're saying la meta, right? So you really want half of the strings to be an answer to full-blooded mezzo forte winds. See, this is what I just don't get, right? Wouldn't it be better to just have all the strings coming in, and to also have the strings start to accompany and double and provide a context and an envelope around the winds as they went to a crescendo, so that when the winds dropped out, the strings would come in as a, not as a sort of a weak echo, but as a continuation in a different flavor, right? Is it possible to rethink that in that way? Because I feel that the way that it is now, I just feel such a loss when we go to the third beat here. That it just feels like there was a slump of energy and of attention, right, of the listener. But, I can understand, like, if you have emotional reasons for that, it's just like, I really wanted to amp up the sense of anticipation here, and then to just drop off because, life is tragedy and so on. And if that is the answer, then totally fine. Yeah. And then here we have a diminuendo to pianissimo, and a further diminuendo. See, like, this is all really nicely scored. I love the way that the strings work in here. And then just a little touch here with the flutes for flavoring. But, watch out for la meta. Watch out for dividing your strings in half. Really save that for incredibly subtle moments. And I feel contrast with strong winds, it's just like a ghost or a shadow of, in terms of a response, right? All right, then on the next page here, beautiful opening flower. And once again, we have issues with balance in harp. You're trying to keep your double basses soft, and that's meritable in this kind of a passage. But there's no question that the harp would have to be mezzo forte here in order to balance with everybody else. It's great that you're keeping your horns down. See, so here's a situation where you're saying, wow, Thomas, you're suggesting that everything be dynamically mixed. You don't like dynamic mixing. And I would say that I never said that you should never dynamically mix things. I'm saying that you shouldn't have a different dynamic on every single staff, or have a scattering of dynamics that just that are playing to a kind of a mixing board approach to the orchestra rather than the natural strengths of the instruments. The natural strength of the horns is that even in a soft passage like this, they will tend to dominate in the middle register, the way they're scored. So, Sigbjørn's approach here of having the horns at pianissimo compared to the flutes above, absolutely rational, beautiful, and of course and the strings as well. Doubling the violas, all the more so since they're weak. Why are the stems going the wrong direction here? I'm sort of seeing that in a lot of scores that are beautifully engraved like this. Why or do we have opposite stems? I don't understand. Was this originally like conceived with a second voice and then you took the second voice out and the stems stayed up? I don't know. Yeah. So look, you don't have to say divisi in parentheses. Unison, divisi, simile, none of them need parentheses. Well, after you've established that. But see, here's the thing is you never go back to, or you don't go back to unison till the end of the passage. I guess it's all right. So unison, divisi, and then simile here. I guess that's all right. Yeah, and lovely flow here. This could be an E rather than a C. And then you don't have to go, da 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 da, repeated note, right? You can avoid the repeated note here by going up to an E. And here as well. Right, so if you just increase I would say, what if you were to have this with the left hand of the harpist taking this and the right hand playing this in the treble staff as a rolled chord, right? And what if when you got to here you played a bigger harmony, right? Just maybe played across what was the notes of the viola and the violins, right, in treble staff. Then you have to you need cross staffing on or cross staff slurs, which as you can see are not the most natural thing. Cross staff slurs and other objects. It just how many years has it been? Notation app world. It should be something. I would say that I think that this should be a goal for all notation applications to have completely nailed the whole issue of cross staff slurs and other objects, so that so things don't shift when the vertical justification changes and so on. When you do a vertical justification on a harp part with a cross staff slur, it doesn't leap up to an incredibly wide justification for no reason. We need rolls that roll all the way across both parts. It's been a long time. It's been decades. Those issues should be solved. All right, but see how you're headed towards what I'm suggesting. So I would say just make these thirds more, just make them more chordal, and I think that you give the harpist a stronger role that you're headed for, anyways, right? But yeah, this mezzo forte, this should be mezzo forte, this should be forte, and then everything else on here works great. It really kind of stays in the same lane for quite a while, but it's all right. It's just so beautifully scored. I'm not going to critique it on those grounds. And then you're leading forward to kind of, bringing up the bassoon and the cellos, and this is nicely scored too with a second bassoon roll in here and the double basses and the third bassoon and so on. I think that all works beautifully. And I love the flute family working together here with the clarinet below. Just so nice. And the harmony and the strings, the diminuendo here. I think that all really sets up this climbing phrase right in here. And I really love the way that you diminuendo out the harmonies as the parts go to the separate player. So I won't get hung up in recommending that this be first violin. I think that it's perfectly, the way that you've scored it, second violin makes a lot of sense. Right, and you don't have to put unison in parentheses. It's a noble marking. It is something that's useful to the players. They don't need a parentheses around it. They'll get it. Just put unison on it. It's fine. All right. Now here, did you notice in your mock-up something that I think that you will also find in your in real life? You're not clearing out your harmonic space as your wind solo rises, right? So here you were clearing out the harmonic space because the instruments themselves who were holding the harmonies had to make way for the new function, right? But here you're not doing that, you naughty boy. So I think you should fade out the accompaniment on these oboes. So by the time the clarinet comes up to this point, the oboes have gotten the hell out of the way, right? And possibly even the third flute as well. In fact, it might be good if everybody just faded out a little bit sooner as this started to rise, so that you just have a clear shot from maybe the middle of the bar, or maybe you could stagger these to sort of fade out just the same way that these did. And then first taking over here, dovetailing. The dovetails are all really nice. I really love the idea of bassoon to clarinet to flute. I think that's a beautiful idea. Yeah, and then shouldn't this roll all the way across? Yeah, and then, just a very romantic part, very Chopin. This is nice. Get rid of the tie. There should be nothing underneath this wandering line, including the harp. Harp, go away. Because when you add some kind of harmonic context here at the beginning of this bar, you are telling the listener what to expect, right? You're saying, okay, well, this is a guided tour now. By adding a chord here, this wandering melody is no longer wandering off on its own. Barvinsky letting the melody wander with no context whatsoever on the downbeat means that the listener doesn't really know exactly what's going to happen next, right? But when you give them the context of where they're heading by giving us a downbeat, then it's almost over-explanatory. It's like, oh, by the way, we're in this key. You get rid of that. You don't want it, right? Yeah. Everything else, I think, is just absolutely gorgeous. I like the way that the strings are scored here. It's really, really nice. All right, so we just have one more section here, section C. And I really love that you're going to different colors here. Like, you're not getting stuck in the same, that sort of same combination of, flutes and then the horns below and so on. And, yes, there was a little bit of clarinet here, but it wasn't the top voice. It wasn't prominent, right? So now it is prominent. You have got octaves in clarinet and tenor register bassoon, and that is such a beautiful sound. Oh, just so gorgeous. That's going to sound amazing, beautiful and rich and reedy. But yeah, no way is the harp going to be able to really come through. For several reasons. One is it's the same dynamic as everybody else. It needs to be louder, all right? But you've set a trap for the harpist right here. And that is that the rumbling of the timpani going through this, even though it's marked pianissimo, it is still enough to confuse this weaker lower register harp scoring, right? Unfortunately, there's kind of no way to do an enharmonic pitch on your harp right in here. Like you couldn't do an F double flat, an F double sharp or an A double flat here. There's no such thing on a harp, so it really has to be the pitch of G repeated. Now, if that is the case, then it's just better to leave it to the left hand of the harpist to play the G. So you probably, here's another cross staff issue, but one that's easy on most notation applications. So just go pluck, pluck, and then left hand continues to pluck, plucks another G, and then the right hand just gets this G. And then you go back to left hand here. That would probably be a better way of distributing these for the harpist. So if there's any possible way to not only boost the harp here in, up to, well, I mean, of course, it's really easy, just mezzo forte on the harp. But if there's any way to add a little bit of accompaniment to what the harp is doing here, so it isn't just like double basses. You're fond of La Meta and Divisi. Could the cellos be helping out a little bit? Maybe a third bassoon, right? Is there something that could firm up what the harp is doing? Much in behind the harp or merging with the harp, playing at its soft dynamic with the harp's mezzo forte dynamic. Right. And then of course we've got this lovely interpretation of the or transcription of the harmony right in here. I think it's nice. I mean, it's I just want to check one little thing. Yeah. So it's just a direct transcription of all of the pitches exactly where they are on the piano, and I feel that it works really, really good, and it helps to set up what happens, to come here at D, where everything gets so gorgeous. So yeah, I just feel the octaves here, they shouldn't be big, right? It's staying subtle, not overemphasizing the pulse was my comment in my evaluation criteria. Calm surface over restless undercurrent. I love the restlessness of the timpani part, but it has consequences. It will be eating up the beautiful lucid, or pellucid maybe would be a better way of describing it, sound of the harp right in here. There is nothing like the sound of those deep strings of the harp, where you can really, really hear them. But what's the timpani doing for that? Like, it's just going, it's so like it really is taking away a lot of the focus. So louder harp is one way of getting out of that. Another way of getting out of that is to turn this into string tremolo, right? And then you get a much more delicate sound with a similar kind of an effect. So there are alternatives to sort of kind of pick away at this a little bit and see how much closer to ideal you can get everything. But I mean, there's no doubt that it's a really lovely bit of scoring, even without all of my suggestions. And I would say that would be really true of this entire thing. I mean, with a few reservations, I would say it's just it's nearly ready for the stands in the way that you have scored it, right? Just a really lovely, direct, and yet subtle in its own way, really, really well apportioned, well orchestrated, nicely done conception all the way through. And I think you should be really, really proud of this. And don't take any of my comments or criteria as critiques against you as an artist or orchestrator, because I'm very impressed by the achievement that you've shown here. And if any of it is useful or rings true to you, then that's fantastic. And if not, don't worry about it. Just use from my suggestions what you can, okay? So thank you so much for the effort that you put into this, and for being one of the higher level supporters during the appeal to help our fellow musicians in really dire straits. It just means a huge amount. I think that is something that we can always feel proud of, that we did, with these orchestration challenges, made them mean something. As I've mentioned in other videos, I don't think I can keep doing that just because the organization is, it's one of the things that slowed me down and made things more complex. It's just more things to look after. So I probably couldn't do that every year. But I wouldn't be averse to doing it again in a future challenge, maybe a few years down the road if there's a real need. But in the case of this score and your contribution to the to the challenge. I'm very happy with this. I'm very impressed, and I really, really want you to join us next year, Sigbjørn, and and take a crack at the offering that we have then, which will be completely different style, different composer, different genre, different approach if you choose to take it, or you can modernize it or do whatever the hell you want with it. All right, but I think that the challenge is going to be enchanting and challenging, and I think we're going to see a huge outpouring of really, really great scores and unique approaches and individual ideas. And I think that the approach that you are taking in this score applied to that would be fascinating. So thank you for that. Thank you, my Patreon supporters, for all of your help, your support, your encouragement. There have been a lot of really lovely personal gestures recently that really helped keep me on track, and showed me the value of what we're doing here. That it's more than just abstract or academic. It is also very personal, and I really appreciate that. And I've made some really wonderful connections through the group and through all the activities that we're all doing online. And that also is a shout out to my website subscribers, and viewers here on the channel. And some people are following every single video in this series, and they have like no dog in this race. All right, they just are really enjoying seeing the outpouring. And there's a part of me that is also just enjoying it, just for the sheer hell of it, the wonderful differences in approach, the fertility of imagination across 152 different orchestrators. It's just a fascinating, amazing thing. And there's more of it to come, so I hope you're ready for it, because there will be at least another release later today, and 3 more tomorrow, and we're just going to keep going like that till we get to the holidays. All right, so strap in, and I will see you with an evaluation of another great entry in a few hours.